Thank you all for coming to the 28th Annual TFAS Journalism Awards dinner, and welcome to all of those who are now joining us and tuning in online. My name is Ryan Wolf. I work as the manager of continuing education programs at TFAS and administer the Joseph Rego Memorial Fellowship for Excellence in Journalism and the Robert Novak Journalism Fellowship. I'd like to start by saying thank you to our many generous supporters here this evening. TFAS's work to equip the next generation of courageous journalists would not be possible without you all. So let's give a round of applause to our sponsors tonight. So this evening, we're going to hear from a new class of Robert Novak Journalism Fellows. They are at the beginning of a journey, embarking on year-long reporting projects, endeavoring to become leading experts in subjects as varied as private policing and classical education. And the fellows that you'll meet this evening will go on to become successful authors, reporters, and commentators, we hope, and they'll follow in the footsteps of Robert Novak and other Novak Fellowship alumni and make an impact in the media for years to come. Speaking of Novak alumni, we'll be presenting Katherine Mangu-Ward, the editor of Reason Magazine, and Novak class of 2005 with the Kenneth Tomlinson Award for Outstanding Journalism. And the Tomlinson Award recognizes a journalist who has exhibited an excellence in reporting and a determination to present the truth, often against tough odds, and I can't think of a better description of Katherine's work throughout her career. We'll also honor the legacy of Joseph Rego and this year's recipient of the fellowship, Faith Bottom. This Rego Fellowship is an opportunity for a 9-month internship at the Wall Street Journal, and it provides critical experience for young journalists to work with many facets of the editorial craft, such as editing op-eds, writing stories under one's own byline, writing as a part of the editorial board, working with outside contributors at every stage of submission, and contributing to headlines and many other story components, fact-checking and research. And by my saying that long list of things, you can tell how qualified these folks are after their fellowship, whether they continue at the Journal or move on to different parts of their career. But first, we're going to present the Thomas L. Phillips Career Achievement Award. The Phillips Award was inaugurated in 1999 to recognize the accomplishments of a leader who has made major contributions to the field of journalism during a long and distinguished career. Thomas Phillips, the award's namesake, as Roger mentioned earlier, is a widely respected businessman, philanthropist, and patriot. He founded the Phillips Foundation to advance constitutional principles, a democratic society, and a vibrant free enterprise system. And under his leadership, the Phillips Foundation launched the Robert Novak Journalism Fellowship in 1994, which later came to the Fund for American Studies. Our 2019 award winner, Roger Kimball, will introduce this year's honoree. A few brief words on Roger. He's the editor and publisher of The New Criterion and president and publisher of Encounter Books. He writes regular columns at American Greatness, the Epoch Times, and Spectator, the U.S. edition of The Spectator. He's also the author of several books, including Fortunes of Permanence, Culture and Anarchy in an Age of Amnesia, The Rape of the Masters, How Political Correctness Sabotages Art, and Lives of the Mind, the Use and Abuse of Intelligence from Hegel to Wodehouse. So let's welcome Roger Kimball to the stage.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, when I think about my friend Neal Freeman, I think of a remark that Falstaff made in Henry IV, Part 1. I am not only witty in myself, was that comic's gentle boast, but am the cause of wit in other men. So it is with Neal. For more years than anyone in this room would care to remember, Neal has brilliantly fulfilled a double role in the metabolism of American letters. He has been what he continues to this day to be, a most distinguished social and political commentator. But he has also, from the very beginning, been a conspicuous cultivator of talent in others. The house of the Lord, we are told by an unimpeachable authority, has many mansions, and so it is with the house of Freeman. Many people associated with the Fund for American Studies will know that Neal was for many years a trustee of this organization, as well as chairman of the Novak Journalism Fellowships. But few people here, I'd wager, will be acquainted with the long list of his other chairmanships, directorships, stewardships, trusteeships, investigatorships, and sundry beneficent righting the ship of state ships. I do not propose to rehearse those many offices, honors, awards, and distinctions, because a complete recitation, being as extensive as the Calcutta phone book, would keep us here long after the port and cigars had been retired. Let me just note that his record, in addition to being very long, is as distinguished as the social register once was, and as politically mature as a campaign roster in the newly great state of Virginia is. I pause to utter the sweet syllables, young and kin. Not to say Brandon, we'll leave Brandon out of it. Neal was an intimate of Ronald Reagan and was as important as anyone in promulgating Reagan's anti-collectivist gospel of private initiative and individual liberty. For that, the country, and indeed the world, is in his debt. Neal was also an intimate of my dear friend William F. Buckley, Jr. He managed Buckley's New York mayoral campaign in 1965, surely the most entertaining such performance in this city's history, as well as a political catalyst of historic import, breathing new life into the corpse of American conservatism. And we know what happened after that. Neal was also an editor and syndicator of Buckley's twice-weekly or thrice-weekly newspaper columns, an editor and contributor to National Review, and the founding producer of Firing Line, which I believe still holds the record for the longest-running debate program. It certainly holds the record for the most intellectually sophisticated and rhetorically nimble such program. Neal Freeman is a man whose intellect is as clarifying as it is acute. Even before Bill Buckley died in February 2008, the famous political rule that bears his name had been garbled by lazy and careless repetition. Neal cleared that up for good with an incisive article on the Buckley rule. Neal had been witness to its creation in the editorial meetings at NR in the early 1960s, when the name Goldwater was being bruited about. There was also a chap called Nelson Rockefeller who had picked up a Republican costume somewhere. I think it is the same costume that Mitt Romney hauls out on certain holidays, but that may just be an unfounded rumor. In any event, the question of the day was, whom should NR endorse for president? The debate was long and spirited, but eventually, all the opinions lodged and docketed, the decision came down from on high. Quote, National Review, Bill declared, will support the rightward most viable candidate. In other words, Neal's side won. It was, as he said, victory for Team Goldwater. In Bill Buckley's lexicon, he noted, Viable meant someone who saw the world as we did, somebody who would bring credit to our cause, someone who will, win or lose, conservatize the Republican Party and the country. It meant somebody like Barry Goldwater. Since this is a family occasion, I will forbear to expatiate upon any contemporary parallels. I will note, however, that taken all in all, Neal Freeman is probably our most significant and faithful standard bearer of Bill Buckley's intellectual and political legacy. For that, too, we are in his debt. I will end by saying that it is a pleasure for me to be here with you and a special honor to present Neal B. Freeman with the 2021 Thomas L. Phillips Career Achievement Award. Neal.
That was the keynote address. I'll follow up with some odd comments after. Thank you, Roger. That was marvelous. Chairman Teague, where's Chairman Teague? Distinguished guests, thank you all. Distinguished guests tonight include the parents of 6 of America's 9 greatest grandchildren. Thank you for being here, Kate and James. My thanks also to Kathy Russo. Special thanks for using my high school picture in the dinner program. I appreciate that. I am delighted to accept the Thomas L. Phillips Award. I first heard that name back when I was in college. There were reports from Dartmouth of a pro-market, anti-communist writer named Thomas L. Phillips. That was very big news. It meant that I, a pro-market, anti-communist writer at Yale, was no unicorn. It meant that just possibly Tom and I were onto something very good. Early in our careers, Tom went into newsletters, I went into newspapers. I like to think I had more fun. Tom, perhaps with more confidence, likes to think he made more money. We both think that in choosing journalism, we chose well. I thank you, Tom, if you're out there in the ether somewhere. I also thank Paul Gigot. For a time, albeit separated by a few years, we held the same job. We answered Bill Buckley's mail. No self-respecting writer wants to write under somebody else's byline, but if you were conscripted to such work, you could do worse than to write as William F. Buckley Jr. In the morning, you could make sport of a myopic corporate titan. In the afternoon, you could peel the skin off a fatuous Ivy League professor. In the evening, you could revive the spirits of deposed royalty. Buckley once claimed that I had extended by a decade the life of poor Otto von Habsburg. That correspondence that Bill indulged himself by assigning to us was basic training in the battle of ideas. How did it pan out? Well, I ask you, has anybody defended the values of the Free Society longer or better than Paul Gigot? Now, the men who built the Fund for Society, Fund for American Studies here at this event, the convener was a man named Marvin Liebman. Marvin was by vocation a theatrical producer. When he would invite you to lunch, he'd ring off by saying, and I'll bring a guest who can entertain us at lunch. When you would show up at the appointed hour, there sitting next to Marvin would be Lauren Bacall, Hermione Gingold, some fabulous lady of the theater who would reliably entertain us at lunch. As a young man, Marvin had been deeply and dangerously involved with the infant state of Israel. Marvin being Marvin, he had aligned himself with the hardest of hardline Zionist factions, the Irgun, which had produced such notable figures as Menachem Begin. When I would ask Marvin about rumors that he had run guns in the Mediterranean, he would wave it off as if the question were of no moment. By the time I meet him in the 60s, he is a concerned American citizen. He's concerned about the America he sees around him, which was not unlike the America we see around us tonight. A Leviathan state bloating at home, a foreign rival growing ominously in the East. Marvin thought we needed an organization to teach young Americans who we are and how we got here. Teach them, most importantly, why we have managed to thrive. Another member of that founding group was Charles Edison. He was a man of some public note. He had been governor of New Jersey. He'd been Secretary of the Navy. Closer to Marvin's agenda, he was a man of considerable personal wealth. That can happen if your father invents the light bulb. Governor Edison, alas, died before consummating any benefaction to the fund, which opened doors for the most consequential of the founding fathers, a man named David Jones, a good friend to some of you here tonight. David was an idealist, the oxymoronic kind, a practical idealist, brimming with both energy and purpose. Over the subsequent years, David bootstraps the fund into existence, becomes its president, serves for decades, builds an institution of import. Thank you, David. David's final service to the fund was to search out, recruit, develop his successor, our friend Roger Bream. Roger was part of that human wave that came to Washington, young people, moths to the flame of power over the past half century. It was said of them that they came to do good and stayed to do well. Not Roger. He never became a lobbyist, never became, as they say in the First Family, a consultant to foreign interests. No, Roger stayed to do good. He lifted the torch of freedom higher, kept it ablaze for a new generation of Americans. Over the past 53 years, I think it is, the fund has had two presidents, two outstanding presidents. How often does that happen? I don't know, but the answer is somewhere between not often and never. I thank most gratefully my editors at National Review, Bill Buckley, John O'Sullivan, Rich Lowry. I add to their number tonight ex officio Lindsay Craig, who has somehow conjured fiscal order from Dickensian chaos, and Jack Fowler, if he is here. Jack served for decades as the attending metaphysician at NR. I am grateful to them for publishing my work as Bill used to put it, through years thin and thinner. Let me close by saluting the previous winners of this award. I have admired all of them. I have found myself in a foxhole with a few of them. Frank Shakespeare, first at CBS, then at USIA. Frank became one of the most gifted and passionate defenders of American freedom. For the Honorable Frank Shakespeare, there would be no apology tours. James Jackson Kilpatrick. Kilpatrick was my first columnist in newspaper syndication. Over time, much time, he became the most widely read political writer in the country. A real upset, surpassing Walter Lippmann and Scotty Reston and all of the gods of that day. Brian Lamb. Brian asked me to produce the first original programming for the C-SPAN network. It was part of a long and painstaking process to build an important audience, a highly engaged audience. Brian succeeded. He opened the doors of the people's house to the people. George Will. George and I overlapped for a time at the Washington Post. My job was to build out the Washington Post Writers Group. George's job was to become our star columnist. He did, and made us both look good. We were fortunate there to work for the greatest newspaper editor of his generation. When I started my own company, Ben Bradley became my first client. As I said, it is retirement fest. Becoming my first client cemented his tenuous claim to greatness. William Rusher. Anyone remember that name? Not enough for William Rusher, I'm sorry. Bill and I collaborated on a long-running TV series called The Advocates, where we made the case for free minds and free markets up against the massed legions of the Boston Triangle, Harvard University, the Boston Globe, WGBH-TV. My researcher insisted on calling them the Boston Stranglers. In the battle of ideas, William A. Rusher was combat ready. He signed bristling memoranda with his initials, giving recipients the impression they had been issued by the War Department. And finally, Robert Novak, first in print, then in broadcast. Bob taught me everything I knew about covering Washington. He was a remarkably generous mentor. He cared about young journalists because he cared about America. Bob believed that without a free and skeptical press, America could never achieve a fully realized democratic republic. Bob was deeply proud of the journalism fellowships that bear his name. After his death, I was deeply proud to chair the Novak program in his stead. And so on down that list. As I read these names, I am reminded that it has been my privilege these many years to serve with my brothers and sisters in the cause of freedom. It is my honor tonight to know they think I served it well. Thank you all. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Emma Frere, and I'd like to start by thanking the Fund for American Studies for giving me this opportunity. My project is titled, Who Will I Call? How Private Security Bridges the Gap Between Rising Crime Rates and Defunded Police. In the summer of 2020, the Defund the Police movement swept through America like a tornado, and many anxious Americans were left asking themselves, but if we defund the police, who will I call if I have an emergency? I was living in Sao Paulo, Brazil at the time, and as I followed the news that was coming out of America, it dawned on me that I had actually been living without police for quite a while already. My family and I lived in Brazil for 3 years, and prior to that, we lived in South Africa for 2 years. Brazil and South Africa are two very different countries, but they both suffer from high crime rates and ineffective policing. In both these countries, private security is the solution that the middle class has hit upon. In America, we're now seeing that crime rates are rising and police are less visible on the streets. I believe middle class people here will also start hiring private security. In fact, I'm already seeing signs that this is getting underway in some places. In my project, I want to start by studying how private security operates first in South Africa and then in Brazil. After that, I want to move my focus to America to try to discover emerging trends here. I'll ask what our new private security will look like, how we're going to pay for it, and also what role the police will continue to fill. I also want to ask more broadly what happens in a country where the government doesn't provide police protection and citizens are forced to pay for their own safety. Ready or not, private security is coming to a middle-class neighborhood near you.
My name is Kevin Daly. I'm one of this year's Novak Fellowship recipients. As I'm standing here tonight, I'm thinking especially of my deceased grandfather, James Trabert, who was a religious viewer of the McLaughlin Group for many years and a passionate fan of Eleanor Clift, Robert Novak's longtime sparring partner. I hope and trust that he will forgive me for accepting an award in Bob Novak's name. My project is entitled Assorted Business, Asian Applicants and Racial Preferences at Harvard. I will be covering the Students for Fair Admissions litigation, which is a challenge to Harvard's race-conscious admissions program, which alleges, among other things, that Harvard engages in impermissible racial balancing of each incoming class, and that Harvard discriminates pervasively against Asian American applicants. My goal is, and by the way, that case is now pending before the Supreme Court. The justices will decide in the coming months whether or not they will hear that appeal once the Biden administration files a brief with a recommendation on that question. The purpose of my project is not so much to attack affirmative action. Rather, my purpose is to air the considerable body of evidence the plaintiffs have amassed, suggesting that Harvard racially balances its class year over year, and indeed does so in consultation with other universities and outside groups. That Harvard's current admissions practices were honed during a period of rank discrimination against Jewish applicants, that Harvard has taken steps to punish dissenters and the plaintiffs in this case, and that Harvard's admissions practices are deliberately structured to avoid oversight and accountability, which we should not tolerate in a free society, especially given Harvard's unique role as a credentialer of the future elite. I wish tonight most especially to thank my wife Rachel for her constant and unremitting support and encouragement during this process. I also want to thank my editor-in-chief at the Free Beacon, Eliana Johnson, for her sagacity and guidance throughout. And I most especially want to thank the selection committee for its confidence in me. I think almost every person of consequence in the center-right media has been associated in one way or another with this project. I can't wait to learn more about Emma's project. I've so enjoyed meeting Kenny Zhu this evening, and I'm so looking forward to meeting Oliver a little bit later. So thank you so much for including me in this most interesting and capable group. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nate Hochman. I'll keep this brief since I think I've been told I have about 90 seconds before I lose all of your attention. So my project is called mapping the right's generational divide in the digital age. The going thesis is there's been an enormous amount of ink spilled about the radicalization of the young left in my generation and the millennial generation right above me. Outside of the relatively insular circles in which people in the conservative world swim, there hasn't been that much attention paid to the fact that there's a parallel process going on the right in terms of people on the right, conservatives, right-wingers, in the Generation Z and the millennial generations who are also radicalizing towards the right in the same way that progressives, young progressives, are radicalizing towards the left. My basic understanding of this is that I think it says something about the state of our generation and even more broadly about the political moment that we're in. And I think there are important insights about that that are relevant to understanding the particular situation in which we find ourselves as Americans that are worth paying attention to and are worth discussing in a broader context. I think it's not news to a lot of people in this room that there's an enormous amount of ambiguity about what it means to be a conservative in the 21st century. I don't think there's quite enough attention being paid to the generational aspects of that. And I think the going thesis for me is that both the radical left and the young radical right are essentially responding to the same set of circumstances with a radically different framework and language to describe those things. But I think there's a really, really important story in the fact that young conservatives are very, very different from older conservatives, and they're responding to a set of political circumstances that I think the older generations, with all due respect, don't fully understand on both the left and the right. And I think it's a useful conversation to have. So I just want to say, thank you particularly to the folks who support TFAS. It's because of you guys that someone like me at the tender age of 23 can wake up and basically get to do his dream job every single day. So I really, really appreciate you guys, and I'm excited to get started on this project.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Wiseman. I'm another Novak Fellow, as you probably guessed already, and I'm delighted to be a part of that group. I'm also really honored to have been chosen as the John Farley Alumni Fellow for this year. As I think is obvious from the speeches we've heard tonight, the ranks of Novak Fellows are an incredible group, and to be joining them is just the most exciting and wonderful thing. My project looks at the fortunes of the Republican Party in America's great cities. When I explain this to some people, I get befuddled looks sometimes, because if you know anything about American politics, you know that cities aren't places where Republicans tend to do very well. The urban-rural divide, we're told, is the defining feature of American politics. Density is destiny, supposedly. Now, all that's true, but my view is that this has become something of a caricature, and that, like a good caricature, it captures some essential features, but it also distorts the truth. And as a result, the picture we're given of party politics in America writes an important chunk of the electorate out of the story, and that is the urban conservative, the urban Republican voter. And so I see in this a journalistic opportunity, which is a understudied tribe in American politics. And so my plan is to go off the beaten track and try and discover this tribe and ask a couple of questions. Who are America's urban conservatives? What do they care about? Why do the Republican Party do so badly in cities? Could they do better? And also, what part could cities play in this exciting, I think, new project to build a multiracial, working class kind of republicanism? I think these questions aren't just esoteric questions about this weird tribe that I've just described to you, but I also think they go to the heart of some of the biggest questions about the future of America, future of American politics. So that's the project. Thanks a lot.
Good evening. I'm Kenny Shu. To be honest with you, I had come up with this project last year, And I was so excited to apply for this Novak Fellowship grant. And I was so excited to get ready to submit that proposal. And then I realized it was April and the deadline was March. But you know what? This is even better because this time we get a dinner. My proposal is called Misled by Diversity, the Internalization of Race in America's Future. Critical race theory is in the schools. What is critical race theory? Why do people care about this? Merrick Garland doesn't care about this. He says critical race theory is not in the schools. The people who are trying to say that critical race theory is in the schools are domestic terrorists. Well, I have bad news for you guys. Critical race theory is in the schools. And it comes under every name and moniker that you could think about, except for critical race theory. And it was invented in not just the graduate schools in the 50s and the 60s, but the teachers' colleges. A philosopher named Pablo Freire created the concept of critical pedagogy in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is to instill a critical consciousness, a mindset of deconstructing capitalism upon students. And of course, to teach students to deconstruct capitalism, you're not going to tell them, oh, we're going to teach you this erudite law school subject. No, you're going to slowly bleed it into them. And that's exactly what our public schools are doing now. And people don't understand what's necessarily going on. But my project will serve to bring light to exactly what is going on, how it is funded, why it is funded, who cares about it, why are people opposing it, why are people supporting it in our culture today. And hopefully I will shed light on this very important issue that is rocking the boat of ordinary parents and teachers across the United States today. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Micah Meadowcroft. I'm the managing editor of the American Conservative Magazine and a Robert Novak Fellow at the Fund for American Studies. My Novak Fellowship project is entitled An Aristocracy of Everyone, the Revival of Classical Education in America, 1980 to the Present. As an increasing number of religious private schools, charter schools, and homeschool programs and curricula have laid claim to the traditional classical approach to education in opposition to the progressive schooling that dominated the 20th century, I believe this phenomenon merits further study as an important expression both of grassroots educational reform and a distinctly American understanding of civil society and civic responsibility. While the revival of classical education has flourished since 3 Christian schools were independently established in the early 80s, with a major increase in numbers and reach in the late 90s, no comprehensive history of this movement currently exists, and definite numbers about its scale and reach are difficult to establish. I hope to rectify that. The reporting projects that will make up my fellowship first ask the question, what is the current state of classical education in America? This entails a survey of the movement's growth, detailing the institutional forms it now takes and its likely trajectory. Second, I plan to profile the 3 original schools that kicked off this movement. That includes a history and profile of Logos School in Moscow, Idaho, a history and profile of Cair Paravel Latin School in Topeka, Kansas, and a history and profile of the Trinity School at Greenlawn in South Bend, Indiana. From there, I intend to ask, how has a model that was first revived in a private religious school context extended into the charter school movement? Finally, I hope to be able to answer where, 40 years into the project, the products of classical education are going. Does this model have staying power, and what kinds of American communities is it seeking to build? Thank you.
All right, so we have one more fellow we want to honor this evening, Sonner Kurt. Sonner's a freelance journalist in California and unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening due to a last-minute illness. So for her fellowship project, Sonner is exploring the relationship between ourselves, our communities, and our use of digital technologies. And I'd like to explain the project to you all in her own words. For a free society to flourish, it needs engaged citizens who can think critically, contribute to thoughtful debate, and do hard things. But it's obvious that our phones, those things that we always have within reach in our back pocket or our purses, provide constant, easy, idle distraction that increasingly seems to prevent us or just distracts us from doing exactly those things. While there's been a lot of attention lately on the companies involved in the attention economy, Sauner's project focuses on the individual. How exactly at a personal or community level is our fragmented attention eroding the qualities we've traditionally relied on to do the hard work of being in a democracy? Things like self-sufficiency, reliance or grit, thoughtful analysis, and compassion. Sauner will be exploring the science and philosophy behind that question, along with researching and reporting on individual and community experiences with social media and digital devices in hopes of a better understanding of what democracy and the idea of freedom look like in a modern world. So let's give one last round of applause to this year's class of Robert Novak Journalism Fellows. And for the next part of our program, I'd like to welcome Paul Jago of the Wall Street Journal to the stage.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you, everybody. It really is a pleasure to be here in person after our long enforced hibernation. Very nice. At the Journal, we're still not back in the office full time, so this dinner turns out to be something of an occasion for a reunion. I've seen some of my colleagues for the first time in 18 months today, believe it or not, seeing them all on Zoom all these many months. So thank you for that opportunity. Congratulations to the Novak Fellows. As always, your ambitions are impressive, your projects equally so. Congratulations to Neal. When you've contributed so much to American journalism, and just when you went through that list of all of those great people, you reminded me of my own time, just starting right out of school, where I got to listen to the school of Frank Shakespeare and Bill Rusher and Bill Buckley, and how much they informed me and what I was able to absorb from them. Great privilege. Congratulations to Katherine as well. The great privilege of being an editor and taking all of the spears and arrows. It's fun. I just want to talk a little bit tonight about the Rego Fellowship and to say thank you. Thanks to the Regos, Paul and Nancy and family. Great to see you after a couple of years. They came up with the idea for this fellowship, and it has really worked beautifully. Thanks to Roger Ream and TFAS, who worked with us on setting the fellowship up. And of course, thanks to my colleagues at News Corp and Dow Jones who've helped us fund this. And especially thanks to all of you who've donated and helped make this fellowship a success. We've really launched 3 journalists, I think, on very promising careers. Our first fellow, Elliott Kaufman, was so good I hired him right at the end of the fellowship. He edited some copy. He joined our editing team. And just a few months ago, I made him our letters editor, which is a job of some responsibility. This means he gets to monitor the restrained and also civil debate that dominates our current politics. Recently, Elliott sent me an email seeking advice on how to handle a letter from Donald Trump, who was objecting to something we had written in an editorial. So I said, go ahead and run it. You may have noticed, much to the consternation of the press corps. And the thing about it is, poor Elliott is getting blamed for having run the letter. You're the letters editor. You made the decision to run the letter. So I go through the digital version of these letters that come in, and they're blaming Elliott. You have to learn the first rule of being a letters editor is blame the editor upstairs. Blame me. Our second fellow is Matt King, who was also terrific, and you heard that he after the fellowship, Henry Kissinger stole him from us. What you didn't hear is that the reason Henry stole him was because he had been so impressed with the editing job Matt had done on one of his op-eds that he called him and hired him. So I called Henry and I chided him. I said, "Stop stealing our talent." But what a great experience he's had. He's getting. Our third fellow, Alessandra Bocci, had a tough year because of COVID. We couldn't meet in the office, but she's back in Italy now, and I'm sure is going to do great things there. And this year's fellow, Faith Bottom, graduate of that noted journalism school, the South Dakota School of Mines. I'll have to tell you, I was on the Pulitzer board for 9 years, associated with Columbia University, and I'll take the School of Mines any day over Columbia University. But she recently wrote a piece on the Art Institute of Chicago, cashiering its volunteer docents because they weren't, the working for free, they weren't diverse enough. And this has turned out to be one of the most popular pieces that we've run in months. Still getting letters, as Elliott knows, who can't quite believe it. I say this all because it makes me, dealing with the Rego applicants and fellows has made me really confident and optimistic about the next generation of journalists. And I know that Joe would have appreciated all of them because that's how he got his start. He was an intern for us for a summer, and I hired him. Put him to work, and he really did soar right from the beginning, writing profiles of Bill Buckley, Tom Wolfe, with his remarkable insight and that great witty narrative style. So one of the pleasures of this dinner for me is it gives me a chance to go back and read some of Joe's work and remind me just how good he was. So give you a little flavor of that. Here's a couple examples. There was this a story under his byline that was the headline, "Here Today, Gone Tomorrow." The proliferation of mustaches in Mr. Obama's Washington is conspicuous, if not bristling. Just read their lips. The president-elect's chief political aide, David Axelrod, wears a sad drooping number. A neatly trimmed hedgerow stretches across prime facial real estate on Eric Holder. It went on from there. Joe understood that journalism isn't really supposed to be a forced ideological march. You got to have some fun. If you want to get rich, what do? We go work for Goldman Sachs. But if you're a journalist, you got to have fun. Here's an excerpt from an editorial headline, "Hillary's Financial Footing." In the Arab world, throwing a shoe is considered an insult, and George W. Bush famously had one hurled at him during a Baghdad press conference in 2008. Less explicable was the pump thrown at Hillary Clinton last week during a speech at a Las Vegas casino. Is that somebody throwing something at me? Is that part of Cirque du Soleil? Mrs. Clinton quipped after dodging the projectile. My goodness, I didn't know that solid waste management was so controversial. Mrs. Clinton ought to pay a visit to New Jersey. But hold on, solid waste management? Yes, Mrs. Clinton was speaking at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries convention. According to the trade group's Twitter account, she told the crowd that recycling can stimulate the economy, offering real value, helping economic recovery. This insight cost the recyclers north of $200,000 to $250,000. That's that talent, that wit that Joe had, and he bestowed it on our readers for so long. And we were privileged to have it. So when I think of Joe, I think in particular of how much fun he would be having today. He'd be saying what a great time it is to be a journalist. The world is changing so fast, as you all know. Readers are looking for insight. They're looking for people to tell them honestly what they see, what it means. It's really a tremendous privilege. And you can do it, as Faith and others are finding out, at a very young age. But in particular, I think the world needs journalists like Joe who think for themselves and challenge the conventional progressive wisdom. The defining trait, I think, of most of the media today isn't their ideological bent, it's conformity. I remember when Bill Buckley, when I was answering his mail, yes, Neal, I was, used to say that the press corps is like the Rockettes. They all kick in the same direction. But that culture of conformity these days is much worse than it was back then, because it's accompanied too often by condemnation and ostracism. The Twitter mob, as you know, will go after you and cancel you. You can't disagree without being vilified, or sometimes you lose your job if you happen to be the op-ed editor of the New York Times. For journalists in particular who are supposed to be skeptical, this is really a disgraceful cultural norm. Fortunately, and I'm grateful for this every day, we at the Wall Street Journal have proprietors who believe in free speech, believe in challenging convention, and support us when we run afoul of the herd of independent minds. Thank you, Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch. I think the only response to that conformity is to defy it and do our jobs of poking holes in it. Kim Strassel and Holma Jenkins did it when it came to the Russian collusion probe. When everybody else was still saying lockdowns are terrific, James Freeman spoke up and said maybe not so terrific, worried about public health and the economic consequences. And of course, we all know the story of the Wuhan virology lab. The people who challenged that, I think, did all of us a public service. So this is why the world needs journalists, all of you. So congratulations again to Faith and to the Novak Fellows. We need you more than ever. We need you to think for yourself. Thank you and congratulations. It's my privilege to welcome Paul Rego, Joe's father.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the kind words about Joe. And a big thank you to all of you assembled here tonight and those viewing online. It's truly an honor to be here and to recognize the exceptional individuals, our award winners, Neal Freeman and Katherine Mangu-Ward, all the Novak Fellows, our previous winners of the Rego Fellow, and our newest Rego Fellow, Faith Bottom. Your attendance and generosity reflect an underlying optimism in the future. On behalf of the Rego family, including my wife and daughter and son here today, we thank you. We gather here to remember we gather here not to remember what Robert Novak and Joe Rego died from, but to celebrate what they lived for. We celebrate them as individuals, but more importantly, their ideas. And as Richard Weaver famously said, ideas have consequences. And parenthetically, the best ideas reflect faith and optimism in the future. We'll talk about faith in a minute, but let's focus on optimism for a second. And optimism in America's founding. It was not a smooth trajectory. It was not neat and tidy, nor was it the outcome known in advance. How did a population of 2.5 million people produce 39 individuals who wrote one of the most remarkable documents in human history? Were these individuals the product of for the ages or the product of the times? Now, could similar genius be found in America today? Chance alone suggests that there could be a young Jefferson or Madison on Manhattan alone. We need to find them, and I believe we can. By identifying talent and creating opportunity, organizations like the Fund for American Studies and the Wall Street Journal and newspapers like that are doing that task. And so it is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce our newest fellow, Faith Bottom. In her short time with the journal, as Paul has mentioned, she's written several articles, including one about the docents at the Art Institute of Chicago that sparked an extraordinary amount of response and overwhelming support. Now, Faith has her training as a civil engineer. Most of you knew Joe as a journalist and perhaps as a student of history. In high school, however, he was exceptionally strong in science. He competed and won science fairs at the local, regional, state, and national levels. He competed and won at those various events, and he also gave a lecture at Harvard on one of his science projects. Joe's strong foundation in science led to sound coverage on healthcare, cybersecurity, and even the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission. So it is fitting that our newest Rego Fellow has a degree in a Bachelor of Science. Most of society's, or many of society's most pressing problems deal with that interaction between society and science. Faith knows that the laws of thermodynamics are unpersuaded by executive orders, and that neither Congress nor the Supreme Court can repeal the law of gravity. And Faith knows that civil engineering and civil society are both essential for our future. Now, being raised in South Dakota, we can rest assured that she has not lost the common touch. She may even know someone who owns a Ford F-150 and uses it for work. I think Richard Weaver said it best. In 1962, he addressed the University of Chicago, and he said, quote, "To be of a place, to reflect it in your speech and action and general bearing, to offer it as a kind of warranty that you will remain true to yourself. That is what it means to have character and personality. And without these things, there is no individuality." Her articles in the journal have reflected a profound appreciation for the importance of tradition in America, a notion that both Joe Rego and Richard Weaver would cherish. Ideas do have consequences. So with no further ado, I present to you Faith Bottom.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. In a 2005 essay for the Dartmouth Review, an essay titled "Something Wicked This Way Comes," Joseph Rego wrote, "Something wicked will always be coming." He was just a senior in college at the time, but he had the wisdom to see that trouble never stops falling on us, and the wisdom to add, but it can be held off. That's the basic job of the conservative, after all, he said, to defend what should be preserved. The world will always lack. That's no reason to wallow in night thoughts. This is what first attracted me to Joseph Rego's work, and maybe this is what we all need to remember about him. His writing shows a kind of wry optimism about the world. He knew that the world isn't perfect, and he knew that the world isn't ever going to be perfect. A lot of bad policy comes from a hunger to perfect the world. But he also knew that things can be made better. He was optimistic in a way that was wry about the failures and fumbles of the human race. Everyone here knows Joseph Rego's Pulitzer Prize-winning editorials for the Wall Street Journal. They're informative and written in a voice that felt as though a friend were relaying that information to you. But what I think impressed me most about Joseph Rego was the character that came through his writing. He felt rare, a writer of a kind that is uncommon but shouldn't be. In his college essays, for example, he cautioned against a homogenized outlook even for conservatives, demanding differing views in a lively conversation. I didn't come to Dartmouth for a convalescent education, he said, or for people to agree with me all the time, neither of which makes for a keen mind, or for that matter, a very lively college experience. Reading him, I also found myself drawn to his early sense of place. I related to the boy who, applying for college, wrote an essay about how Cape Cod and the people there have deep roots, even though Cape Cod is a place I have never been. I related to him when he wrote an article about his longing for the old and wild ways of his college, even though Dartmouth is a place I have never been. And that's what good writing does, isn't it? I even related to what Paul Gigot has described as his impish delight over Ivanka Trump's brand of flammable scarves. These are big shoes to fill, and I have doubts I can do it. But for the opportunity to try, I want to thank Joseph Rego's parents, Paul and Nancy, who have been very kind and encouraging. I want to thank the opinion editors and writers at the Wall Street Journal, who have guided me through my first few months as a fellow. And I want to thank the Fund for American Studies, our host for tonight's dinner. The fund has been nothing but helpful as I start out as a writer. It is a great honor to be this year's Joseph Rego Memorial Fellow. I can't think of a better place for a young journalist today. Thank you.
When Paul Rego was speaking, I was reminded of something came up deep back in my brain that John Gardner had written that was, if society puts more credence in its philosophers than its plumbers, neither its ideas or its plumbing will hold water. And so I thought that was, we're pleased to have Faith as our fourth Rego Fellow. Thank you, Neal Freeman, for your kind and enlightening remarks tonight and for letting us honor you. And it's my pleasure now to present our second honor of the night. And it's truly a privilege to do this. We are going to be presenting our Kenneth Y. Tomlinson Award for Outstanding Journalism to Katherine Mangu-Ward. This award was established in 2015 to recognize a journalist who has exhibited excellence in reporting, journalism, and a determination to present the truth, often against tough odds. We particularly look at our past Novak Phillips Foundation fellows to find a person who deserves this award. The award is named in honor of the late Ken Tomlinson, who I know many of you know, a friend to many of us here tonight, whose distinguished career spanned 4 decades. In addition to heading Reader's Digest during its prime, Tomlinson was also one of Ronald Reagan's key lieutenants in bringing down the Soviet Union, having served as director of the Voice of America during the 1980s. Ken later served as chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, where he oversaw the launch of the Arabic language Al-Bara TV, which brought American ideas on human rights and individual freedom to the Middle East. Ken also sought to restore balance in public television programming, drawing condemnation from the left. PBS stalwart Bill Moyers attacked Tomlinson as, quote, the right-wing monopolies point man to keep tabs on public broadcasting. Myers remarked that Tomlinson, quote, found kindred spirits with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, where the animal spirits of business are routinely celebrated, close quote. Ken responded, this is not a controversy that I brought to public television. There is an element within public broadcasting that brought the controversy on itself. Ken was a longtime member of our advisory board for our journalism programs and served as a judge in the Robert Novak Journalism Program. Well, I have the pleasure tonight to present our Kenneth Y. Tomlinson Award for Outstanding Journalism to Katherine Mangu-Ward, Editor-in-Chief of Reason, the magazine of free minds and free markets. Katherine started at Reason as an intern in 2000 and returned after working at the Weekly Standard and the New York Times. Her writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Slate, and numerous other publications. She is a frequent contributor on radio and television networks and appears every Monday on the Reason Roundtable podcast. A few of her more memorable Reason cover stories include a defense of plastic bags and an argument for why you almost certainly shouldn't vote. Her recent articles include Don't Try to Fix Big Teach with Politics, The Unexpected Predictable End to the War in Afghanistan, and Abolish the FDA. Which reminds me, as Paul said before this dinner, I also go back and read some of Joe's writing, and I read over his editorials that won the Pulitzer Prize, including one excellent one on the FDA that could be published tomorrow, changing a few names and mentioning COVID. I so wish he was here to write about the FDA today. Katherine is a graduate of Yale University, where she received a BA in philosophy and political science, not plumbing. Commenting on Reason's 50th anniversary, she said, quote, "Reason has always sought to keep our readers abreast of new threats to liberty. But since the very beginning, Reason has also told the stories of people who are working to make the world more free, more fair, more fun, both inside and outside the libertarian movement." I'll note that at a recent Southern California Journalism Awards Gala, Reason received awards in 12 award categories, ranging from humor and satire to investigative reporting. Katherine was nominated in the category Magazine Columnist, but she lost at the buzzer to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. On her Twitter account, she challenged him to a rematch next year. Katherine was, of course, and that's a true story, Katherine was, of course, a 2005 Robert Novak Journalism Fellow, Phillips Foundation Fellow, as Ryan mentioned. Her project then was how 25 environmentalists set out to save the planet and wound up making everyone's lives just a little bit worse. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Fund for American Studies, I'm so very pleased to present our 2021 Ken Tomlinson Award to Katherine Mangu-Ward.
Hey folks, I am so happy to be here with you in the after times, and I am also deeply sensible of the fact that I am now violating the Roger Bream rule. It is 9:08, people, so I am going to keep it quick. I have always had a soft spot for this crew. I just really enjoy the Fund for American Studies crowd. My affiliation with the institution actually dates back a little further than my Novak Fellowship to my college days, when I was under circumstances that are still a little bit mysterious to me, deemed a Ronald Reagan future leader. I don't know how that worked out, if I've done right by the Gipper, but I will say that Ronald Reagan once called libertarianism the heart and soul of conservatism in the pages of Reason magazine, so we'll call it a wash. I've been active ever since, of course, as a Novak Fellow, as well as at gatherings of this type, and as the size of these gatherings have grown, so has my affection for the group, which contains multitudes, I would say. There's really quite a mix of folks here, and yet every conversation is civil and productive, which is an increasing rarity in this world. I'm generally very optimistic and cheerful. I was delighted to hear the note of optimism in so many people's remarks, but I'm troubled by the rise of political polarization and the increasing rancor of the way that politics is going in this country right now. All signs really point to a troubling trend that Americans hate and fear people who disagree with them politically. I doubt that everyone here could agree about who to vote for in any given election, or even if you should vote, if you happen to be me. But TFAS's project is and always has been bigger than any given election, and I think that's really important. It's about preparing another generation to fight for a future of individual liberty, personal responsibility, and economic freedom. It says it right there on the website, guys. I looked it up before these talks. My colleague and a former Novak Fellow herself, Stephanie Slade, reminds me that fusionism wasn't and isn't an uneasy truce between libertarians and social conservatives to defeat the godless commies, although that is a worthy cause, but rather an alliance of people with a shared commitment to the principles of a free society. Our understanding of the good life might be very different. Mine involves a lot of rockets and shrooms, and I understand that y'all might be more into like church and golden retrievers or whatever. But neither of these visions is sustainable in a world without respect for free speech, freedom of association, free thought, and freedom of contract. It is those shared liberal values on which TFAS was founded and which it continues to do the important work of preserving and promoting for future generations, even as they come under attack from both the left and the right. In short, the Fund for American Studies is more important now than ever, and I know that that is the cheesy thing that everyone says at this moment in these dinners, but it's genuinely true in the case of TFAS. I really believe that there is an important role to be played by an institution that values educating future generations to be civil and respectful and to incorporate conversation and debate into a world where we are undergirded by liberal values that we share. I want to thank Roger Bream, I want to thank Randall Teague, and all the folks who do the work that makes TFAS possible, and all the folks that made this dinner possible tonight. And I really appreciate you letting me be a small part of the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Katherine. I appreciated those remarks. That was excellent. And thank you, Stephanie, for helping her. I wanted to just suggest before we leave that we take our programs with us, put them in a time capsule of sorts, and pull them out in 5 or 10 years. And let's take a look where these fellows are and where Faith is. And that'll help us know if this was a success this year. I think it was. I was so impressed with the fellows and with Faith that I have no doubt, as Paul Jagot said, it's what makes me optimistic about the future. I hosted a lunch at the Fund for American Studies a couple weeks ago. It's one that Stephanie usually comes to, but she wasn't. But one of the guests said, are things really getting worse in this country, or am I just getting old? And I think I replied, well, you are getting old, but things are also getting worse in this country. But I'm an optimist, and when you work with young people and you work with these outstanding fellows, you know the pendulum does swing back and forth. Young people tend to be rebellious, and that works in our favor if we promote liberty in this environment. And I think most of the kids who in polls say they favor socialism over capitalism don't have a clue what socialism is. They never lived in a world with a wall that separated and divided Germany. They weren't witness to the kinds of things that socialism brings, the misery it brings in places like Venezuela, which is why we have 2 young Venezuelans touring college campuses this year to talk about their experience there. So we just need to get the message out more. But I hope when you pick up that program in 5 or 10 years, you'll see that these students are where today people like Molly Hemingway, Matt Coninetti, Tim Carney, Steve Hayes, Stephanie Slade, Peter Suderman, Robbie Suave, Katherine Mangu-Ward are really influencing the direction of ideas in this country because they have consequences. Thank you for your support. I particularly want to thank the Smith Family Foundation for their generous support of our programs. I want to thank Paul Jagot, the Wall Street Journal News Corp, and Dow Jones for your personal support, Paul, for this, and everyone here who supports us. If you do not support us now, please consider a gift that will help us select more great fellows in the future. Good night. Have a safe trip home. Thank you.